general status update of where Ethereum is at right now. So this is this sort of really nice GUI that we've made for our public test network, which has been operational for, I believe, at least 2.5 months now. So, this is basically a network that's running the exact same code, or at least the exact same protocol and close to the exact same code that Ethereum is going to be running when it's live. We've been spending the last little while just trying to sort out all the last remaining issues, any problems around the network, problems around the different Ethereum clients not being in sync, and so forth. So right now normally we have anything somewhere up to about 700 nodes on the network at any given time. It changes around a lot. We've tested most things, including sending transactions. We have people mining blocks on it. So if you were trying to develop things on top of Ethereum, then you actually basically have the tools right now to start testing, and I'll go into that a bit more, but at least go into some of the tools that you have. But the general idea is you'll be able to create applications, run them on a network which pretty much looks exactly like the Ethereum Live network is going to look like when we end up releasing it, and all of the sort of infrastructure is already there for people to start building on top of it. So when we're planning on launching, the thing is that given the sort of stuff holding us back from launch, it's extremely hard to make an estimate. So it depends entirely on how many other bugs we find, essentially. If everything goes smoothly, could be 10 days, could be 20 days, could be 30, could be 40, could be 50. And software development is kind of like that. The progress that we have made is that we're actually at the stage where we have, finalized protocol, all of these sort of pieces of infrastructure in place. It's just a matter of making sure that everything is stable enough. So, when we're ready to release, you'll see an announcement, presumably on Reddit, presumably on a bunch of other social media, something like 48-hour countdown, and Ethereum will be launched. So, as far as even though we're not quite there yet, there's already a whole bunch of people that are building applications on top of it. So about a month ago, we had ourselves, with the help of the Ethercast team, which is a big Euros launching, and a couple other people, have come up with this list of all the people that are developing applications on top of Ethereum right now. So this is kind of it's kind of like a list of just about everything that anyone could that anyone has ever thought of trying thought of trying to do with Crypto 2.0. There's stuff involving gambling. There's stuff involving exchanging tokens. There's smart contract stuff. This is a decentralized exchange between Ethereum and Bitcoin. Crowdfunding, investment, voting, Internet of Things, reputation. There's at least 3 prediction markets. Decentralized social network stuff, wallet, data feeds for smart contracts, ready to work with prediction markets, decentralized marketplace. So think of basically decentralized eBay, cloud storage. At least a couple. I know there's at least a couple of people that are interested in healthcare applications. So healthcare is kind of an interesting use case because it's an industry where there's definitely a lot, it's definitely all about data, at least in the last couple of decades. It's definitely about information. There's a lot of concerns about keeping information private. There's concerns about keeping track of information and how can you possibly do those 2 things at the same time. Fortunately, cryptography can come to the rescue, but the question is exactly how. So there's, right now, sort of the only approach that just like every other industry, the only approach that the traditional world sort of knows right now is to have some big trustworthy institution and hope that that big trustworthy institution continues being trustworthy, continues holding on to all your data and doesn't get hacked and so forth. And there's groups that are interested in trying to use various cryptographic tricks to sort of encrypt the data, split it up among different pieces and so forth, and help preserve privacy and help make the system more robust. So that's there's at least a couple of projects in there that are kind of starting to do that. There's trustless privacy it uses a technology called Shamir secret sharing, or at least it's in the very early stages, so I shouldn't say planning to use that technology, but it's there. Blocknet, guarantee market, insurance, more healthcare, product origin tracking. I'll actually get into this one in more detail. So after I go through this after I go through this wrap overview, I'll probably actually go into like 3 or 4 of these in a lot more detail. Pokerium, decentralized poker, yet more decentralized gambling. Decentralized gambling is probably going to be actually one of the major, even one of the most socially useful applications within the first year, just because the thing with gambling is that, first of all, if you're a gambling site, you're going to end up collecting a bunch of people's money, and so, you could run away and keep the money and have a nice vacation in the Caribbean. The second thing you could do is you could sort of fudge your random number generator and have it provide the values you want, say 50.2% of the time instead of 50% of the time. And statistically speaking, that could probably like double or triple your profits, and there's no way that people could prove it. So using blockchain-based random number generation and like actually just implementing the whole thing in a decentralized and trust-free manner is just something that a lot of people are excited about. Also, the decentralization aspect helps you knock the fees pretty much down to 0. There's gold storage, ride sharing basically, decentralized Uber. If you pick a startup, and then you put the word decentralized in front of it, that's generally the description of at least 1 or 2 projects. Identity and reputation platform, there's a bunch of those. Automation platform, board election, basically, the idea here is that you sort of have a company that's kind of run directly on the blockchain. Accounting, a bunch of forums, even a bunch of games, interestingly enough. It's yet another decentralized Uber, a bunch of cloud computing marketplaces, your insurance. So that's kind of the rough overview of stuff that people are doing right now. Now, going into some of the specifics, I guess some of the most interesting projects out there. So one of them is this Wayfund, which is, you can think of it as being a kind of decentralized version of Kickstarter. So, the general format is that someone creates a campaign and they say, I want to raise $10,000 within 30 days for some purpose X. And purpose X could be donated. It could be donated to charity. It could be, it could be like starting some kind of product. It could be starting a company. It could be a whole bunch of things. And the idea is to start a campaign. If you receive whatever amount that you hope to receive within the right amount of time, then you get the money. Otherwise, everyone gets their money back. So the idea is it's a kind of donation that only processes if enough people simultaneously donate to make the whole thing worth it. So the idea here is that projects like Kickstarter and Indiegogo do that. Projects like Wayfund is basically a decentralized version of that. So if you go into their code over here, go to Wayfund, then this is the main piece of code over here. There we go. So this, by the way, if you're going to be developing applications on Ethereum, you'll probably be dealing with programming languages. There's like 2 or 3 main programming languages that you could use. Also, Solidity is the most well-developed one of them right now. So this is kind of the code of this particular application. So you can see that, first of all, it keeps track of users, it keeps track of funders, people participating in campaigns, it keeps track of campaigns, and there's a function which creates a new campaign. You pass it the name of the campaign, you pass it a website, you would pass it some address for the video, the address of who's going to be receiving the money, the amount that you want to receive, the time limit, category, address config is basically, so what address config basically lets you do is this actually lets you create a kind of crowdfunding campaign where if it succeeds, people automatically where the people that participated in the campaign sort of automatically get registered as having been as having been participated and automatically get, I guess, like you could design it any way you want. Like you could give them shares of a kind of decentralized autonomous organization. You could just give them recognition on the blockchain. You could do just about whatever you want. So it's actually designed to be really configurable. And it sets up a campaign. There's a function for contributing, and if the time for that particular campaign has run out, then it just clears out the campaign and it does refunds. If there's a function for refunding everyone if a campaign failed. There's a function for paying out if a campaign succeeded, and that's basically it. So the original version of decentralized crowdfunding I did took about 40 lines of code. This one tries to be much more advanced and sort of fully featured. It goes up to 130, but there you go. So that's roughly what these kinds of contracts look like, right? They basically are programs. They have their own kind of internal database. So the database in this case, it has a couple of things. Let's see, what do we got? We got a set of campaigns. Here we have campaigns. Here we have number 8. Here we have users, events, new campaign, contribute, pay a refund. So pretty close to the way that you would write a program. Except in a lot of ways it's much easier because there might be a lot of sort of boilerplate that gets taken out. Like in this case, it's sort of designed to be as simple as just writing any kind of sort of very regular program, just sort of single file program. And the idea is once you create this program, you would compile it, push the code to the blockchain, and you would basically have you would have a crowdfunding application that runs on the blockchain, completely trustless, completely decentralized, and so forth, and it just sort of works autonomously on its own. So, now the other important point about Ethereum is that we're trying to sort of make this stuff easy to use as much as we can. So there's, let's see, Wayfund's demo. So this is kind of the demo. So you can start a campaign, and the campaign demo could be, give me money because I want to be rich. Crap, 32 character maximum, I can't be rich. Website, makemerich.com, end date June 26th, goal, let's try 75 million Ether because there isn't that much in existence. Pick a beneficiary address, category, I don't know, I think I have a political movement, start the campaign. Not sure to what extent the demo is available right now, but the point is you'll be able to start the campaign. Like if you run this, sort of inside of the Ethereum client, then when you hit start a campaign, it'll provide you with an identifier for your campaign, and you'll be able to, and it'll be kind of like a link to it'll point other people to it, and they'll be able to contribute. So this is kind of the sort of thing that at least we're targeting for in Ethereum is we're trying to basically make it as easy to use these decentralized applications as it is to use a website. So in general, like if you want to access these applications sort of in a fully featured way, then you'll basically need to run them inside of the Ethereum client, which is called Mist. It's basically, it's kind of like a browser. It's based on the same WebKit technology that Google Chrome is based on, but it's sort of specifically targeted to writing decentralized applications. So it's like there's specific developer features that let you kind of talk to the blockchain instead of talking to the servers. In the longer term, there's also a project called Vapor, which lets you kind of work with Ethereum from inside the browser. It's kind of like an Ethereum client written in JavaScript. You'll be able to stick inside of a web page. So that's another way that you'll be able to use if you talk to Ethereum in the future. So that's rough. It's way fun. Let's see what else do we have here. Coming soon. This is their site demo. So that's basically where it is. So the project is actually, this is sort of the baseline. So I'm kind of talking to the founder of this project quite often. We actually chose it as one of the recipients for a foundation grant program. And it's actually going into the guy's actually going to do a lot more interesting stuff in the longer term. Like one of the other projects that he's working on is something called the boardroom, which is basically a way for people to create a kind of blockchain-based organization. So you could imagine, so a structure you might have, say, 5 directors, and you need 3 of the directors to approve a motion. And the motion can be sending the money. It could even be changing the sort of constitution of the organization. It could be adding a director. It could be removing a director. It could be sending, other kinds of assets, sending a message on behalf of the contract or whatever else. And, theoretically, the idea is that you would be able to kind of run things like, it might take a while before this stuff gets adopted for large corporations, but at the very least, something like a school club could easily be run on top of this thing, because why not? It's like for those use cases where things are sort of not formal enough to start piggybacking off of the legal system, this might actually be quite useful and great. So that's, and as I mentioned, those two pieces actually kind of plug into each other. So you can actually have a setup where you have a crowdfunding campaign, and then if it succeeds, the people who participate in the crowdfunding campaign sort of automatically become the first shareholders of some DAO. So that's first piece. Second piece is Augur. So Augur, for those who don't know, it's something called a prediction market. So the idea with a prediction market is it's a market for special kinds of shares that basically represent sort of probabilities of events occurring. So the idea is that you could imagine a share that would pay $1 if, let's say, Rand Paul wins the 2016 presidential election in the US. And if someone else wins, it would pay $0. And the idea is you'd have these shares, people would be able to sort of trade these shares on the market, and the market price of these shares kind of reflects the probability that the market thinks that event is going to happen. So if the market thinks, there's a 3% chance Rand Paul is going to win, then the price should hover right around 3 cents. And if it turns out the price is at, say, 15 cents, but you think the chances are only 3%, then you have the ability to sort of short the tokens, like basically buy negative quantities of them to sort of profit off of what you think the discrepancy is between the market price and the chance you think that that the event is actually going to happen. Or if you think that the tokens are undervalued, if the market thinks they're 3%, but you think it's 30%, then you can buy up a whole bunch of tokens and profit off of it. So, I guess for some people it's a gambling platform. For some people it's a platform to make a profit by using their knowledge and their information and their reasoning ability. And for society, it's a way of getting kind of like quickly pulling, I guess, the market for what they think the future is going to be. Potentially even what they think the future is going to be if certain specific things happen, which is, so you actually could have a prediction market on that says, if, let's say, a company hires this CEO, then how well are they going to do? If a company hires that CEO, how well are they going to do? So you could actually sort of directly use them as aids in decision making. So the idea was actually invented by Robin Hanson in the 1990s. It's been around for about 20 years. There have been a bunch of experiments about it for the last 20 years. U.S. government's had a mixed attitude toward them. It's tried running a couple of prediction markets. It's also had a regulatory hostile attitude toward them at times for various reasons. In one case, actually, it was because there was a prediction market that was on Hollywood movie box office sales, and Hollywood was kind of got really embarrassed because the market was basically telling people that their movies were crap ahead of time, and they managed to get that particular kind of prediction market banned. But it's kind of like so far it's this kind of idea that's been mostly in academia, but here, blockchain-based application. You could use it. Anyone can start a market. Anyone can participate in a market. They have this really cool consensus algorithm where sort of the entire network works, where like all the Augur participants sort of work together to decide at the end what the outcome of different events is. So the way that this algorithm works is basically that if you have some event, let's say 2016 comes along, someone wins the presidential election, the system kind of pulls everyone. Hey guys, did Rand Paul win? And if the answer that you reply is the same as the answer of the majority, then you get some extra amount of tokens. And if your answer is different from the majority, then you lose some amount of tokens. And so the idea is that if you expect everyone else to be honest, your incentive is to be honest as well. And hopefully, if the equilibrium sort of gets established and starts off, it's going to stay that way. So project, right now, it's got their own GitHub page. Augur client is here. They are actually using another programming language. Let's see, where is it? Right, clients, this is as one example. So the idea here is that it's, this is another language, it's called Serpent. It's designed to be fairly similar to Python. This is some of their code. So that's another one of the sort of more interesting things that's being done on Ethereum. Augur has kind of its own internal currency built in. They're going to be doing a crowd sale of that really soon. On the completely non-financial side, this is actually sort of one of the more heartwarming ones. So the idea here is that it's basically blockchain-based supply chain tracking. So you can, if you have some, the idea is that if you have a product that's going through a fairly complex supply chain in the process of manufacturing, it's going first one component is being manufactured, then two pieces are being put together, then it's being distributed, then sold, and so forth. Then it can sort of this app kind of lets you basically sort of timestamp and sort of authenticate every step of the manufacturing process. And what that lets you do is, when you receive a product, it lets you sort of scan a QR code and immediately see on the blockchain, this is what happened to it, this is where the parts came from, and so forth. And that it makes it a lot easier to, first of all, figure out whether or not a product is good quality, whether the manufacturers are reliable, whether you think that they're trustworthy. If you're concerned about some manufacturers having, bad environmental standards, then it makes it easier for you to avoid manufacturers like that. It's basically a way for honest manufacturers of saying, yes, provenance.org. Yeah, provenance. Provenance, yes. So this is something that's. So what I actually also like about Provenance is that they are blockchain based, but they're not telling people they're blockchain based. Here I'll show you. Control F. Let me try Ethereum. Whoops. Nope. Blockchain. Nope. So point is that this isn't like a sort of crypto. This isn't like the standard sort of crypto 2.0. Hey, we have a hammer. How do we turn everything into a nail? Sort of thing. It's actually. Well, these guys had this idea before Ethereum came along. Then they found out about Ethereum and they decided it's a cool platform. It's a platform to do this stuff on. And then they're just continuing on with their original vision, and Ethereum just happens to be a decent way of implementing it. So it's actually, I think, exactly the kind of showcase that we really need to have in order for stuff like this to take off. So applications of this stuff in general, product manufacturing is one of them. I guess for objects that kind of get passed around between different owners a lot, it might be especially useful, especially between distinguishing reals from fakes. Maybe applications of something similar to this in art. So,
excuse me, would the data on this be public?
So you could do it in a bunch of different ways. One way is to make all of the data public. Another way is to just sort of publish hashes of the data onto the blockchain, and then the data itself could be sort of sent around only to specific people. Like you could take just about any choice in the middle. Select Ethereum slot machines app, as we've already gone through. There's a bunch of groups that are trying to do stuff like various different kinds of issuing digital tokens on top of Ethereum. This is one of them. So this is just one of the examples, but there's a bunch of companies that are basically trying to let you sort of have dollars on the blockchain, and they're saying, okay, we're going to issue a bunch of blockchain tokens, and we're going to make a legally binding promise that if you give a blockchain token back to us, we'll give you $1, or or CNY, or a euro, or Hong Kong dollar, or an ounce of gold, or whatever else. So that's one of the So there's a bunch of those like that, and the benefit is that you have the ability to use the blockchain as a financial system without having to deal with cryptocurrency volatility. Point Nurse, another one of those healthcare applications, which at least according to this chart is using Ethereum. Although I haven't really looked into it much. So cooperative and distributed community for health, if my Spanish is correct. So those $dollar is a kind of decentralized blockchain-backed dollar. So this is one of the sort of more interesting ones from an economic standpoint that basically tries to use a monetary policy to target the price being $1. So it's not actually backed by $1, but it sort of has an algorithm that say issues more currency units if the price goes above $1, issues fewer currency units if the price goes below $1, and so forth to try to automatically stabilize the price. So it's this is, I guess, one of the more sort of interesting economic experiments that we'll see going around, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of people doing economic experiments on top of Ethereum. This is only the first one of them. So yeah, that's the sort of showcasing of a few pieces of interesting stuff.
Can I ask a question on those already? So there's a ton of companies that are up there, and they all have really nice, splashy kind of graphics and such. How built out are the actual companies on top of them versus the actual technology? I mean,
right.
What exactly are they
showcasing? In all of these
showcasing?
cases, I think the technology is so in all of these cases, I think the ideas are ahead of the technology, and the technology is ahead of adoption. And I think that's heavily true in this industry completely. I think that a lot of these ideas they take a month to come up with, a year to implement, and 10 years to adopt, and that's just perfectly fine, and that's how we're going to have to progress in this area. So, here, you can see a lot of these. When your website is GitHub, that clearly means that it probably means you don't really have a company or just a guy doing this as a volunteer. And I guess one of the issues with this whole paradigm is that there's a lot of fun stuff you can do, and but there's much less stuff you can monetize. And maybe that just means in some cases there are things that have to be done for fun, and you're not going to get rich off of them, at least not directly. So, in terms of how you can get involved, so first of all, if you're a developer, then Ethereum is an application development platform. Yay, it's made just for you. So we have this tutorial on DAPPs4beginners.wordpress.com. So as one example, your first tab. There we go. A bunch of stuff, blah, blah, blah. Ethereum enables the decentralized web, referred to as Web3, yay. So here's an overview of one of the Ethereum clients. So you can see how the client is kind of like a web browser. In this case, it literally sort of has a web browser inside it. This is another one called Mist. Choices, or contract. So this is just a simple example of, let's make a decentralized currency. So over here you can see, there's a function for initializing it, and it just initializes the balance of the sender to 10,000, and there's a function for sending, and that's just about it. So, in more detail, I guess, first of all, you can see, so the first step, obviously, is to actually write this, right? Now, as a developer, the first thing, generally when you write code, you want to test it. So there's a bunch of ways for testing, a bunch of ways to test code. One of them is we're actually developing an IDE, an integrated development environment that's specifically designed for this particular programming language. Another way of doing it is if you're using a servant, there's an environment called pyethereum.tester. I'll actually show that to you right now. So if you see, I don't know. So So this, for example, is simple code for a domain name registry on top of Ethereum. It's like as simple as you can get. There's one function for registering. And you know, you can. It's basically it's just a database that you can write to once, and once you've written to a particular key, no one can ever change it. So the and to get is, let's say we're going to go into cd work Ethereum servant Python import from Ethereum import tester. Now we're going to create a state object. Now we're going to use something called ABI contract. And we're going to create one there. So C has a function for registering. So if you want to do, let's say, I don't know, register 1, 2, this is obviously going to succeed. If you want to register 1 again, then it's going to fail. If you want to register 1 again, it's going to fail. But let's say if you want to register something else, then it's going to succeed the first time, next time it's going to fail, and so forth. So, like you can see, just sort of by calling it over and over again, you can see that it's sort of works as intended. And you know, this is a Python module, so what you can do is you can actually create you can literally create extremely complicated test cases that look like this, where you create objects, you call them, you sort stuff, you call them, you sort stuff, and so forth. So you know, if you're a developer, this is something that you'll be relatively used to. So for just the backend part, like generally, you know, generally applications have two parts. They have the sort of backend code, they have the front end code. Backend is sort of what happens on the blockchain, and front end is, you know, the interface, how do you interact with it. So backend is all the stuff that you want to make sure you have down right first, because you know, if you don't have a good backend, then you have a bad application. If you have a good backend, then okay, you know, people can eventually figure out how to access it over time, even if it's going to be complicated. So if you wrote your servant code, if it passes a test, or if you wrote your Solidity code and it passes tests, then you know, great. It means that this part of the code works. Then what you get to do is you can then type in, let's say, servant compile Bitcoin, and you'll see this big long text string. And when you receive this piece of code, this is the code that you'll actually be able to push onto the blockchain. So there's a special command inside of the Ethereum. So, like, by the way, you don't have to understand or even fully memorize or even understand all of this. It's all in the tutorials. It's all going to be available. It's like we're specifically going to try to handhold people's stuff through this as much as possible. But this is just sort of to illustrate the process. So once you know your code works, once your code is tested, you have this, and there's a special command for pushing the code onto the blockchain. When you push the code onto the blockchain, you get an address back. Now, go on to step 2. Right. Important concept, don't run out of gas. So the idea with gas is that it's basically a way of preventing people from taking up too much computational time on the Ethereum network. So in order to, in general, every block in the Ethereum blockchain has a gas limit of 3 million right now, which basically means that you can take at most 3 million computational steps. So, you know, the idea is that every transaction has to include some amount of gas, which is like the amount of gas that it's sort of allowed to consume. And you know, by default, to send a transaction, you need 21,000 gas, but then if you're going to take another 40,000 computational steps, you need to make sure to increase that to 61,000. And you might want to add a safety factor just in case. If you don't add enough gas, let's say if you only add enough for 20,000 computational steps, but your program runs past 20,000, then all the execution gets reverted, but you still have to pay the fee. So it's not very nice things happen if you're not careful there. So now create contract. So this is there's also actually a way of sort of doing all of this directly in the C++ client. Push, push, and you've created your first contract. Now, the next step, of course, is creating the actual interface. So the idea here is this part is actually like extremely similar to just programming a web page. So the idea here is, you got your HTML, you got your JavaScript, stuff that any web developer is familiar with, and over here, you have, like what this is it's basically just a very, very simple GUI. In this case, it's just storing, whatever you want. And now, if you actually want to do things, then you could. There's a bunch of JavaScript objects, like you do like inside of the JavaScript, you do web3.eth, a whole bunch of stuff. And there's a lot of options for that. So there's this article here for there we go, JavaScript API. So the thing that you'll probably be using much more than anything else is send transaction, which sends a transaction. So the idea is that generally when you have a button in HTML, there's this field that's like on click and you put in a function, and that function is typically some function in JavaScript. So normally in a normal web application, that function might say make, I don't know, it could make an HTTP request to the server. Here, instead of basically wherever you would normally do HTTP request to the server, you would do a set transaction thing. And when you do this, it actually calls it sort of sends a transaction directly to the blockchain. And once you get once it's either been done successfully or not successfully, there's a callback, and you can sort of keep on going. So that's sort of major takeaway from all of this is this half is very similar to traditional web development, at least the front end side. So the only difference is that there exists this sort of magic object called Web3 that has some web3.eth, and there's a bunch of other things, and you'll have to sort of learn how to use them. But that's sort of the only specific components, the one specific component that makes this different from any other web development. So that's the basic sort of summary of the stuff that you'll have to deal with as a developer. And from a sort of bigger picture standpoint, I guess, regardless of whether you're a developer, regardless of who else you are, first step is if you want to do something on Ethereum, figure out what you want to do. Figure out what areas you're interested in, what you're passionate about, what do you have experience in outside of crypto. Figure out if you're going to build something that actually helps the world, figure out what part of the world you actually want to help. Whether it's something environmental, whether it's health, whether it's something to do with supply chains, finance, and come up with some idea, idea for an application that you think people might benefit from, and then start building it. And starting to build it, it's hard at first, but we're trying to make it as easy as we can. There's a bunch of code samples of people that have already done it. So if you follow some of the other links that are in that spreadsheet, you can actually go to, you can see their code. If you really want to, what you can do is you can just take their code and you can basically start from there and make sure the license is fine before you do that. But start from there and just sort of add and remove things as you want, and eventually sort of turn it into what you want the application to be. At least as a developer, sometimes that helps more than anything else. And then eventually you've written up all the code. Try running it inside of either the C++ client or inside of Mist. And the tutorial that I linked, this particular tutorial kind of goes through that. If you need any help, first of all, you can ask on Reddit. Second, you can ask on the forum. Third, we have an IRC chat, which is also linked directly to a Skype group. So if you type something up there's a bunch of people that are willing to help you. There's a bunch of ways. Feel free to contact any of these people personally. At least I think most of the people are fairly nice. What do you think? I think you're one of the better ones.
Can you talk us through the 4 stages of launch?
Yeah, so stages of launch are that, first of all, so the first stage is what we're calling Frontier, which is like the initial Ethereum launch. So importantly, in Frontier, we're going to try hard to make it as secure as possible, but it doesn't come with perfect guarantees. There will be speed bumps, there will be forks, there will be issues, and it sort of comes with that warning in mind. Do not assume that, you can start writing contracts, you can start sort of moving Ether around, you can start doing applications. Preferably do not start things that are like very long term. Like, don't try to like create extremely complicated DAOs right from the start, have these DAOs control Ether and so forth. That might just generally, this is sort of what we're calling internally the flaming cowboys on the moon version of Ethereum. So be careful. Once Frontier is stable enough, then we're going to make a second release, which we're calling Homestead, which is going to be it's going to be sort of a more kind of public-oriented release to some degree. It's going to be substantially more. It's going to come with stronger guarantees of working well and being secure and so forth. Next release after that, we're calling Metropolis, which is going to introduce the full version of Mist, which is like the Go client with the graphical user interface and everything else. So, like, if you want to use Mist now, you actually can, but it's not sort of officially blessed and considered to be secure enough and sort of ready for general usage. So the kind of stuff that we'd like to see for Metropolis are, I think there was an Ethereum Mist presentation. Let me try and look this up. There we go, this is the one. Stuff like that, This is roughly what it's going to look like. And it's cool. So this is all a combination of like mock-ups and some of this, like the basic design has been done, but not the entire design. And there's a bunch of sort of features like like having different identities, having all of these, having sort of very strong infrastructure in order to help people manage their keys and sort of give applications partial trust without giving them full control over their accounts and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be done for that, but you could probably look through this presentation yourself. This kind of gives you an idea of what we're trying to go after. Once that's ready, we're going to release that. Fourth version is Serenity, which will include a bunch of protocol upgrades. We actually already have a very long list of stuff that we want people to do for Serenity. Or that we want to do for Serenity, rather. So this is some of the features that we've kind of realized that we really need to have. There's one of them is proof of stake, the other is other stuff, the concept of events, so the ability to write programs that kind of automatically trigger at some point in the future. Like right now you can do something fairly close to that, but not quite, because what you get is, basically because what you get is, what you would need is you would need to have like some account that sort of pings the blockchain once every few minutes. So like you could sort of build infrastructure around it, but it's not nearly as nice as having it sort of be a blockchain feature. So that's something that we're going to add on, probably going to add on around Serenity time. There's obviously scalability concerns, but that's probably going to be an even later version of Ethereum that properly addresses. So there is a technical roadmap like from Serenity onwards, and the whole thing's going to last like at least 3 or 4 years.
Well, what are the timeframes between Homestead, Frontier, Metropolis, and
Frontier to Homestead probably like 2 or 3 months. Homestead to Metropolis 2 or 3 months. Metropolis to Serenity 2 or 3 months realistically.
What does the community look like now? What does the overall kind of Ethereum community look like? Where is it? What are they doing? Who works for Ethereum?
There's a lot of interest from all parts of the world now. So Ethereum.org, the foundation, hires about 30 people or so. This is the set of application developers, a whole bunch of interesting people here. There are a couple of companies that are interested in sort of developing Ethereum applications and being on Ethereum. There's some academic interest. There's some interest from, to some degree, there's a couple of businesses that are trying to get into it. Increasing interest in China over the last couple of months. Hopefully try to get people involved in developing applications and other fun stuff. So that's like, you know, the part of the Ethereum community I think that sort of matters the most is getting like all people that are actually, you know, doing stuff on it. That's you know, like applications are I think basically the blood and soul of the Ethereum platform. There's a bunch of meetups in a whole bunch of different cities. At this point, I'd say like, yeah, you know, the one thing we need more is developers, as just about every software platform does. And you know, if you're not a developer, then chances are you have some other talent that's relevant to building products and actually getting them adopted, which is also extremely important. So that's basically where so I think people generally have been quite supportive, you know, especially on our testnet. We've gotten a lot of help from people. There's a lot of people that are trying to run the clients and are sort of reporting stuff to us when things go wrong, that are doing a good job of breaking the testnet, that are, and, you know, we've uncovered a lot of stuff with their help. So, yeah, I think the community's great.
How about the organizational structure of Ethereum itself? I mean, there's like the nonprofit. I mean, can you explain how that all works together and how it will develop in the future?
Yeah, so there's the Ethereum Foundation is based in Switzerland right now. It's the entity that's kind of doing pretty much the main entity that's focused on Ethereum development right now. You know, in the long term, you know, eventually its initial funding is going to run down, and we're still sort of exploring different options. So one option that we're looking at is sort of Linux Foundation approach of sort of having the foundation be involved in kind of managing and coordinating to some degree, but having most of the development being done just by people employed by companies. There's it's just one of the strategies. There's other approaches that we're looking at. So, you know, right now the Ethereum Foundation is kind of a sort of big central like body that's pushing everything. But in the long term, I think we expect it to become like, it's going to have to mature over time. So with, you know, we're looking at things like the Linux Foundation and, you know, things is probably as one of the best examples of a software foundation that's succeeded and that's been doing good work. And, you know, there's a bunch of other sort of tech foundations. And the way they generally work is, you know, they have a board of directors, people vote, potentially ending up leading to a process where some people vote on who the directors are, but we haven't really fully decided to sort of to what realistically what a future board is going to decide exactly which direction things go in that regard. So that's something that's, so we 2 months ago we announced a sort of public call for people who are interested in becoming as directors or advisors of the Ethereum Foundation. So that's something that we're going to be figuring out over the next couple of months. Like, we'd like to see a kind of body of, you know, we'd like to see a group of people that are, you know, that have like experience in a bunch of other in a lot of other areas to sort of help carry the organization forward, so that it can actually, you know, during the stage where it's sort of something closer to a mature body and not just the startup trying to get a product off the ground. So I guess that's, you know, the way that the Ethereum Foundation progresses is something that we'll just provide more information on as things happen. Aside from that, you know, there's a lot of other wonderful groups and wonderful entities that are working on Ethereum-based projects. You know, there's groups like the Augur team. There's at least a couple of companies that I know about, and a lot of them have great people in them as well.
What is the advantage for a developer to use
Ethereum?
Yeah.
So
right now, if I have a business going right now, let's say it's a mature business and I want to use this platform,
right. So first of all, it depends on what you want to use it for, right? So you want to figure out what business, what particular need that you have where the blockchain can help. And, you know, it's a technology, and the technology can help. I mean, it can help a lot of people in different ways. You can't help everybody in every way, just like anything else. So I guess the first step is figuring out, you know, do you have any of the problems that blockchains are good at solving? And if you do, then
which are those products?
And so far, there's a bunch of these sort of specific applications, whereas it turns out blockchains provide a lot of value. So the idea is it's a kind of highly transparent, cryptographically auditable database that's kind of maintained by an entire network, provides very high reliability, very high security, solves a lot of trust problems because there's no single person that controls it. So, doing things like issuing assets on it, doing things like running smart contracts on it are areas that a lot of people are interested in. Now, not all businesses that are going to be involved in Ethereum necessarily need to be writing applications. Some of them might be using applications. So, if you're the sort of company that does something to do with international trade, then chances are someone might write some kind of application to do with escrow, or or arbitration or something similar. You might decide that it's useful. So, like in the long term, I think that most of the usage is going to be sort of usage of applications themselves.
Can you focus on creating new business models based
we're
on this
focusing-
platform, or on improving the ones that are out there?
Well, we on Ethereum are focused on just building the platform and letting people use it for whatever they want right now. But in general, like if you want to know what kinds of business models or application models or in general exist on it, then here's one of the lists. There's also, yeah, you can also go much more deeply in sort of any one specific area. So it's like if you're talking about blockchains in finance, then there are a bunch of specific areas where it might make sense to do certain things. If you're doing blockchains and you're doing manufacturing, then there's this whole supply chain tracking concept, and then it's a whole different conversation about how you sort of interface with that. So right now, with East Ethereum, we're not trying to sort of at this point we're not trying to sort of say, okay, Ethereum is the platform for supply chain tracking. We're going to push really hard to try to get everyone to use that. It would be great if people do that, but that's something that we're sort of leaving up to the community to a large degree.
Who is driving this tech community, the developer community, or
right,
investors?
So the Ethereum core is a combination of, the community in general, I think, is a combination of developers and people that are interested in using the applications.
Not so much investment community.
There are investors that are kind of poking around, but it's...
Actually, we spent most of today talking to potential people who are with an investment angle. I mean, so I think that the interest is there.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of...
I think it's,
for a
lot of these, it's too early, right? Like, these guys are at sort of... most of these guys, they're at the receive $50,000 from Y Combinator stage. They're not at the stage where they're looking for a Series B round. So, it might take a bit more time. But, it depends.
How are you partnering with other organizations or working with other organizations so that you yourself don't become like a walled garden and, kind of what's in is in and what's out is out?
Ethereum Foundation isn't sort of explicitly partnering with people that much. There are definitely sort of groups that we are sort of informally have good relations with, and we're very happy to help. So, we know of a couple of companies that are building a whole bunch of applications on top of Ethereum. We've been talking to the guys inside IBM. We've been trying to sort of get into sort of the groups like, for example, like the Blockchain IoT group. There's for each and every one of these areas. For example, Providence that I mentioned, one of the developers is also working part-time for Ethereum. So it's there definitely are sort of specific projects and groups that we have very, very close connections to, but that's probably as far as it gets at this point. And in part, that's just because, at this point, like the very specific stage we're at in development right now, we're just trying to get 1.0 out. And the kind of work that we have to do for that does not depend at all on people use it for. Once 1.0 is actually out, then, it's going to be a different conversation. The other group that we're actually that we've spent some time talking to is also academics. There's people interested in things like cryptographic formal verification, coming up with sort of combining smart contract technology together with cryptography, and trying to sort of figure out how to write more secure software, I suppose. So that's and the closest, some of the closest things that we have to partnerships are also in that area. Yes.
So how do you see Ethereum will be like interacting with other similar, I won't say other like decentralized platforms like maybe BitShares, Max.
It depends on what kind of interaction you want, I think. So like one of the things that we did is we have a proof of concept application, which is like a decentralized exchange between Bitcoin and Ether. And theoretically, you can sort of generalize that into a decentralized exchange between Bitcoin and Ethereum assets. So that's one of the things that you can do, right? So then, aside from that, there is right. So that's theoretically you can do something like that between Ethereum and BitShares, between Ethereum and NXT, and so forth. There might be some technical considerations in terms of how hard it is for Ethereum to verify the consensus algorithm of the other system. But in a lot, especially in the proof of stake case, it shouldn't be too hard theoretically. So that's one possibility. Another one, to some degree, it depends on exactly what kind of interoperability you want. So like just trading tokens and moving tokens around, that's great. Can you do something like a two-way transferable token, basically the equivalent of a sidechain between Ethereum and some other system? That's going to be a bit harder because the other system also has to be smart to some degree to sort of handle the second part of the two-way peg. But that's it would be definitely interesting to do just as an experiment. For things like smart contracts, yeah, I mean, what the exchange lets you do is it also lets you make smart contracts that say, if someone sends some amount of, say, BTC to this address, then send some amount of Ether to this other address. So you can do something. You definitely can do things like that.
Is that on the smart contract side? If the event trigger is not within the program itself, it's something externally determined then.
Right. So the nice thing about the external trigger being in the Bitcoin blockchain is that what we've actually built is we basically built a Bitcoin client inside of it that can go into an Ethereum contract. So Ethereum basically knows what all the Bitcoin blocks are, and that's not because we did it in the protocol. It's because we built a contract to do it.
How do you make sure all the things are transaction? So if you have like contracts interact with other contracts, and then if it failed, how do you revert back all the transactions given that, like say, you may end with a loop, like
you mean including Bitcoin, or you mean just inside of Ethereum?
Just inside Ethereum, like
so
say
the idea is that when a transaction, like basically, you mean how the reverting is implemented? I mean, it's basically done with journaling. So we keep track of all the changes before we commit them, and then if there's a revert, then we sort of revert everything step by step to the change where it's the step we're reverted to.
I would like to ask about the community when we're talking about the interface between Ethereum and Bitcoin, actually. What is the sentiment inside the Bitcoin community towards Ethereum? What do they...
there's a bunch of different groups. Some people are fine with it because they're just interested in crypto technology in general. There's some people that are taking a sort of maximalist Bitcoin should be the only cryptocurrency stance, and there's and then there's people that say this crypto 2.0 stuff is useless and it's really all just about the currency. My opinion is almost the opposite to some degree. So it's a pretty wide range of opinions.
What's your view on the current block size debate?
Right, my current view on the current block size debate. I mean, I'd say realistically, if they don't increase it, Bitcoin's going to become useless pretty quickly. But I think that just increasing it from 1 to 20 seems a bit silly because it's just replacing one bad formula with another bad formula, and what we really need is sort of more thinking on exactly what the correct formula is. So one of the idea that we're using for Ethereum is we're saying that it's a kind of dynamic limit that's based on an exponential moving average of the past 1,024 blocks. So, like you actually see on the test out, like there is a sort of floor of the limit, which is like 3141592 gas. But if the amount of transaction usage in a block always gets close to full for a few hundred blocks, then it sort of jumps up. And I think something like that would be worth trying for Bitcoin. And there might be other sort of more exotic ideas, like trying to say reject blocks that take more than 1 second to process, or some weird variant of that, and that might somehow. and like finding some way of sort of targeting that might also be an interesting approach. But I think the thing is that like we need in general this problem of like setting limits, which is sort of the same problem as the problem of setting fees, is really one of those areas where there just really hasn't been enough thought. And to some degree, we've done a lot of thought, and the problem is fundamentally really, really hard, because it's a bunch of public goods stacked up against monopoly problems, most of which are pretty much impossible to measure, and that's like it's a matter of almost to some degree figuring out what it is that you want out of a system, what the different trade-offs are, and yeah, I mean something has to be picked. The question is exactly what the best thing to pick is. And the thing is, in the long term, like one of the things that I don't like about the Bitcoin protocol is that it kind of implicitly assumes that the Bitcoin protocol as it is all that you need. And you could do a couple of soft forks here and there, but that's basically but everything sort of can stay within that framework, and that's fine. But in reality, that's I think it's a bit of a wrong stance to take, just because technology is going to continue improving. Fact is, you're going to have to upgrade. You're going to have software that doesn't upgrade is software that's going to die, and that I think that the protocols that are going to win are the protocols that are built with that and with the understanding of that necessity in mind.
How do you think about the platform you use for various purposes, and how you thought about a roadmap for that?
Yeah, there's definitely people that are talking about a bunch. People bring that up from time to time. I mean, to some degree, a lot of these more nefarious applications end up being fairly easy to attack, just because a lot of these decentralized systems, they tend to rely on things like reputation and trust and so forth, and those things tends to only work if the system is sort of dominated by people that are kind of in favor of it continuing to exist. So in a lot of, it's extremely case by case. Like in a lot of cases, there are different kinds of like attack vectors. So one of the canonical examples is using prediction markets as assassination markets, and the reply that Paul Stortz had originally given was that basically, if something like that happens, then everyone in the system could basically just collude to lie about who died at some particular time, and then the system becomes useless. So in a lot of cases, there are kind of opportunities for people to sort of collude and make those kinds of applications less effective. In other cases, like it's some things are just going to happen, and people are going to have to adapt. So that's not just a matter of Ethereum. Like there's stuff like Zero Cash coming out, which provides much stronger degrees of privacy for just about any kind of digital transaction that has costs, that has benefits, and it's just going to happen. Although in practice, I think the interesting thing is that all of that stuff has happened with Bitcoin to some degree, to a much lesser extent than it might have seemed. And even in something like Bitcoin, it's basically an unstoppable means of sending transactions to people. And the amounts to which people are doing nefarious stuff with it actually isn't that large in the grand scheme of things. There's sure you can get to dark web markets, but sort of anything worse than that hasn't really. I don't think there's been that many cases of it popping up. And to some degree, I think that's because there's not much individual incentive in doing it. To some degree, people aren't interested in sort of forming communities around basically screwing over every other community. I mean, it's one of the things that's impossible to predict. It's one of those. I mean, it's one of those things that we can definitely. It's definitely worth studying, and there definitely are people that are sort of trying to study that sort of dark side of things and see, are there ways to mitigate that? And sometimes there aren't, sometimes there are. One of the reasons why it's hard to give anything more of an abstract answer is precisely because it's sort of still very early and a lot of it just hasn't happened.
How do you interface with policymakers to explain stuff? Or do you interface with them?
I mean, like, So the existing, I guess, so even just the plain old Bitcoin community seems to have done a fairly good job of interfacing with policymakers right now, I'd say. There's people were expecting Bitcoin to just get outright banned within 2 or 3 years, and as it turns out, there's a bunch of politicians that speak out outright in favor of it and in favor of understanding that it's something that should be sort of given space to develop. The 2.0 stuff, that seems to be something that's off of most regulators' radar, at least for now, just because it's sort of so new and none of the applications have really started creeping up. I'm sure it will get on the radar at some point. Exactly what that's going to look like, I mean, we're going to have to see. The nice thing is that we have, even though there aren't too many people inside of government that are predicting and actively thinking about a lot of this stuff, there are people in academia that are. And to some degree, that side of the community actually is prepared to a more substantial degree. Like groups like, there's a few researchers at Harvard that have been doing a lot of good work in that regard. So, when the time comes and when things on top of, I guess, speaking about crypto platforms more generally start appearing, then to some degree it depends on what those things are going to be. So far, regulators have been very good at, I think, just understanding the difference between Bitcoin itself and stuff on top of Bitcoin that happens to be illegal. There's yes, the SEC has gone after people that do Ponzi schemes, and that's great. But there's the court, I understand, as one of the FBI arrest warrants said, that Bitcoins in and of themselves are illegal and have legitimate uses. So, in terms of this stuff as well, it's probably going to depend heavily on sort of what the first major events are that sort of color people's perception of this. It's going to depend on public perception heavily. It's going to involve also, I think, governments realizing how they can benefit from a lot of this stuff. The idea of things like cryptographically authenticating everything and the potential that has to reduce fraud has a lot of benefits. Just at the same time as some of these things have costs.
What's the dialogue? You mentioned healthcare, and it's an industry that has amounts of data that are normally government, certain controlled by government.
Yeah. So
are you working with governments on certain sectors and that,
We ourselves haven't talked to. Well, I mean, some people that are very close to the Ethereum project have been talking to regulators. Some, there have been a couple of calls on people from the Federal Reserve. As we've said, we ourselves haven't been sort of looking into specific industry verticals until very recently. That's definitely something worth doing. It's
you yourself as you yourself, or the foundation itself?
The foundation itself, I'd say, and even people inside the foundation. So, the healthcare applications, that's something that actually we don't really know too much about, just because that's we know a couple of people that are doing it, but haven't researched it too heavily. And I'm sure there are plenty of regulatory issues, and it's a sort of regulatory acceptance challenge much more so than this technological challenge. And there clearly are benefits for regulators, potentially substantially reduced rates of information being leaked and so forth. But it's I think it's for each application it's complicated. It's complicated. It's in areas in some areas there's people that are scared. In some areas there's governments that are interested in this technology already. There's the government of Honduras, and they've announced a partnership to deal with blockchain-based land registry. So there definitely are people that are already sort of talking to them, and I think if this whole concept of 2.0 can be perceived as something that has benefit to those kinds of groups, and particularly I guess solving trust problems in areas like the third world, then that would help adoption greatly.
I think we'll stop there. Give him a slight break from talking so that you can then come to him for the questions and make him talk a bit more. Thank you, Vitalik. Amazing. If you guys want to know more about the Ethereum kind of project and you're not already kind of hooked into all the channels, the best channel is the Meetup itself. Second best channels, we have a smaller but growing WeChat group, so come and scan the group QR. Obviously, if you're on Reddit, Ethereum Reddit, as he said, there's a Skype and IRC kind of combo chat, the forum itself, so no kind of shortage of different areas to kind of get information about Ethereum. But like you said, you know, the most important thing is that people are kind of starting to get involved. So far, I'm unfortunately the only person who's organizing events here, but hopefully that will change. I mean, there's so many different areas that we could be talking about for crypto, IoT, legal, accounting, whatever you want. I mean, there are different ways to kind of attack the ideas behind it. So I hope that if you are interested in Ethereum, and if you're not a developer like me, you can still start to kind of create conversations around Ethereum and help it kind of progress. So other than that, if you're not on the Bitcoin Association Hong Kong Facebook group, please get on that as well. And thank you so much for coming, and a big hand to Vitalik for spending time with us.